My name is Erkki Ormala. I have spent quite a long period of time in senior executive positions in industry. And we have an interesting panel where we are looking at the questions how the innovation can flourish in the collaboration between the different stakeholders, civil society, as well as industry and the other members of the quadruple helix. But let's start from a message from the United States. Erich Von Hippel is a professor whom we all know, who have had a long history. He's the founding father of the so-called user innovation paradigm. And he has been very kind and has been prepared a video for us. So I'll give the floor to Professor Hippel.
Hello, my name is Erich Von Hippel. I'm a professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and I'm really honored to receive the Innovation Luminary Award. The award was for work on democratizing innovation by my colleagues and myself, and in this very short talk I want to tell you about some recent work on that that's coming out in a new book called Citizen Innovation. The basic idea of democratizing innovation is in opposition to the conventional wisdom in economics. In economics, it is assumed that the producer is the innovator. What you see there is Joseph Schumpeter, and what Joseph Schumpeter and followers have argued is that innovation, development of products and services for consumers, is a producer-centered phenomenon. You see that traditional arrow below, that's marketing research, R&D, production, market diffusion. Activities all carried out within producers, it's assumed. So one looks at you and one says, what do you need? And then the producer goes on and converts that need into a product, and you, the consumer, are a passive recipient of that product. Now, research that my colleagues and I have done in the area of innovation shows that in fact consumers are extraordinarily active. They're not visible in the producer innovation paradigm, but that's a problem because there are a great deal of innovators who are consumers. This is 3 innovation surveys. We've done 6 by this time, but this is nationally representative surveys in 3 countries, and what you see there is significant fractions of the population in fact do develop innovations for themselves. In the UK, it's 6.1% of the population. That's 2.9 million people. Contrast that figure with the number of full-time R&D people in the UK who are developing products for users, and what you see is that number being about 22,300. So the ratio of citizen innovators to producer innovators is more than 100 to 1. As you can also see, the consumers in aggregate spend a great deal of money, all along the line about as much money as producers spend developing products for consumers. Now, we frame the material that does not fit into the producer innovation paradigm as a separate citizen innovation paradigm. Here we can focus on what citizen innovation is about. So in that paradigm, what we see is self-rewarding citizen developers to the left of the top arrow. They collaboratively work together to create innovations, or they independently do it one-on-one. And then you have peer-to-peer free diffusion. Now, the essential difference between citizen innovation and producer innovation is that citizens do innovation in a transaction-free way. That is, nobody pays them to innovate. They do it during their leisure time. And they give away their innovations, generally peer-to-peer diffusion, for free. So the definition of citizen innovation then is it is transaction-free in the sense of it's free from compensated exchanges of property. And it involves design information that is unprotected by the citizen developer, potentially acquirable by anyone for free. You can immediately see the enormous contrast between that and the producer innovation paradigm, which has transactions at its very core. Its developers are paid, and the producers sell the innovations for money in the market. Now, very quickly, here are a couple of examples of citizen innovation. Here's one made by an individual. He thought perhaps it's much better to ride your suitcase than drag your suitcase. So he put an electric motor into a suitcase, and you can see him happily zooming along here in an airport. There also are very serious innovations that are developed by users. Here's an example. What you see in this picture is a woman named Dana. Dana Lewis has type 1 diabetes, and on her left is, or her right, is her fiancé, Scott. Now, she was an engineer, is an engineer, she found an enormous number of calculations were involved in actually trying to keep her blood glucose within range during a day. So she thought, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an artificial pancreas. The producers said, well, you know what, maybe in 5 years. Dana said, I'm not waiting. So what do we mean by an artificial pancreas? What we mean is you continuously measure your blood glucose level. You have an insulin dosage calculator that determines how much insulin you should be given. And then you have an insulin pump which delivers the dosage. The device on the left, the continuous glucose monitor device, exists. The device on the right, the insulin pump, exists. What is lacking to make this a closed-loop artificial pancreas is the dosage calculator in the middle. And that's what Dana and Scott created. So you can see their equipment here. And what it does is it takes information from the glucose monitor, calculates based on what Dana's activities and intake will be, what the glucose level is and what the insulin should be, and it injects the insulin automatically. This is, again, a user citizen innovation, a serious one for her own sake. Her artificial pancreas achieves within range glucose levels better than manual calculations did. She's good at manual calculations, but they're just very complex, and as you saw, there are hundreds of them that she has to do a day. Now, going back to this idea then about the citizen innovation paradigm, what we see is we see individuals who are self-rewarded, as I told you, innovating and giving away the innovations. The innovation activity without pay is viable for these citizens because they are doing it for self-reward. Now, what is the nature of these self-rewards? The nature of the self-rewards, and we've measured this in Finland and other places, consist of things like personal use of my innovation. What we see there is Dana. She gets personal use of the artificial pancreas she developed. She doesn't need anybody else to pay her for that. She directly is self-rewarding. Sometimes people get a benefit from helping others, like Scott helped her build that thing. Sometimes you have a lot of fun doing it. That's a big motive in open source software and often in development as you go to your basement and work. And you learn a great deal from innovating. When you do a cluster analysis, what you see is that you have users who have a dominant motivation of self-use, but they have other kinds of rewards mixed in. You have participators who are primarily doing it for fun. There are a lot of those, it turns out. You have helpers like Scott, who are primarily doing it to help someone else in an altruistic way. And then finally you have a small minority of people who are citizen innovators, but who really are trying, in the end, to do this for money. Now, just an example of helping. Here is a person, his name is Ivan Owen, and he is a guy who made marionettes and posted the designs on the web. Part of what he did in his marionettes was he made hands that could be manipulated by the marionette operator. You see that there in the lower left in sort of skeletal form. Now, that eventually became a hand that children could use who don't have hands that was very functional, and you see a happy child there on the right. How did he get there? Richard did not have a need himself, but somebody named Richard Van Aas, who cut his hand half off as a carpenter in South Africa, contacted him when he saw the hands that you see in the upper right-hand section there that, Ivan Owen had developed. They worked together, and they ended up with a hand, and then later, you can see here it's a metal hand consisting of pieces, then later what happened was they made it so it could be 3D printed. That is the version that went open with their design. And you see here the children who receive these hands. How do the children receive the hands? They get them for free. I told you that Ivan developed the hand for free in his leisure time. What they do is they distribute the designs for these innovations across the internet. People with 3D printers are put in touch with children who need these hands, and they print them locally for the children. It's fabulous. Again, transaction-free, an amazing kind of a situation. Now, what we have to understand is that, in fact, citizen innovation is not documented currently in government statistics. And so part of the job that we have here is to bring it to your awareness and to bring it to the awareness of policymakers and researchers so that we can, in fact, start to systematically explore its importance and support it, because it is a positive thing for social welfare as well as being a large thing. Now, I told you before about two forms of paradigm here. One is the producer innovation paradigm on the bottom. One is a citizen innovation paradigm on the top, and I've described how that one is transaction-free. Now it's time to turn to the interactions between these two paradigms, just to give you a sense for that. The two arrows that you see connecting them are what I will describe right now. The first arrow there is innovation designs being transferred from the user innovation paradigm, the citizen innovation paradigm, to the producers. Citizens develop these innovations for themselves. They make them free. Producers, as well as other users, can pick them up, and they do. In the case of Ivan Owen, Ivan gave them away for free. Richard Van Aas decided to form a company, RoboHand. So basically, he transferred from the citizen innovation paradigm as an entrepreneur and became a member of the producer innovation paradigm, selling them. Also, we have citizen innovations providing designs to producers as well as to startups. And so what you see here is you see an example of GNU Linux being transferred down to Red Hat Linux, developed in the user innovation paradigm, the citizen innovation paradigm, transferred down. We also see mountain bikes, for a completely different example, developed by users, mountain bikers, now a major part of the bike market. Producers sell them all the time. They got the designs from users. What else? Well, there's an interaction in terms of citizen innovations complementing producer innovations. So what we see here is, as I just told you, the mountain bike was something that got transferred from the citizen innovation paradigm to the producer innovation paradigm. But riding techniques are also essential for a mountain bike. To use the unique qualities of a mountain bike, what you really need is the techniques to do it. In other words, techniques, mountain bike riding techniques, are an essential complement to mountain bikes. But there's no business in that. So citizens transfer these peer-to-peer. After all, you didn't go to Mountain Biking Academy, I'm sure. Your children didn't either. They transfer them peer-to-peer, and they are complements to what is sold in the producer innovation paradigm. In other words, the producer is dependent upon the actual operation of the citizen innovation paradigm in this field, and in many fields, as further exploration will show. Next, citizen innovation increases social welfare in the sense that citizen innovations compete with producer innovations. Remember, citizen innovations are diffused for free. In the case of Linux, you can get a free copy of Linux from the citizen innovation paradigm. At the same time, you can buy a copy from Red Hat that is easier to install and so forth. But Red Hat has its prices controlled, in a sense, by competition from the free. They cannot raise their prices enormously high. After all, if they do, people have the option of going to free Linux. Now, because citizens sometimes create innovation with commercial potential, it can pay producers to support citizen innovation. This is a bit of a model that I won't go into here, but it's with a colleague of mine, Gambardella, and also Christina Roche, and we have a paper on it. What it shows basically is that when there are still a lot of customers who will buy an innovation, it can pay companies to help users innovate, to create a better flow for them of innovations from citizens that the company can adopt and commercialize. This has long been the case in the case of commercial products that are done for industrial users. Here's an example of gate arrays, a kind of semiconductor, where the semiconductor producer gives tools to the user and says, create your own semiconductors, we'll produce them for you. So that's the red arrow on the right. It's innovation support. This has now spread over to the Citizens Innovation Platform, where you see, for example, companies like Valve, which has created something called Steam Workshop. A game on the bottom there, is Skyrim in this case, is something that is sold by a producer. But modifications to these games and improvements to these games are done by citizens. And to help them do those innovations which profit the companies, there is this thing called Steam Workshop, which enables users to more easily create modifications to the games. What you see there is the producer sort of channeling innovation effort by citizens into a direction that profits the producer. In a way, it's an adaptation that is now evolving to an understanding implicit amongst producers that citizens can do very valuable innovations. Finally, we talk about the fact that, there are some cases where innovations are not of interest to producers, and we still need to learn to diffuse these. In the case of citizen innovation, the task now in front of us is to say, how can we support it? How can we understand it and support it? It is positive for social welfare. What we know is that citizens do not, because they are self-rewarding, protect their innovations. Citizens are willing to share it for free. But being willing to let others free ride is not the same as being willing to think about other people's needs during development, design to satisfy other needs as well as your own, and invest time or money to make others aware of your innovation. This is a form of market failure. Because there's no market connecting innovators with potential adopters in the citizen innovation paradigm, you have a problem with respect to optimizing what the citizen innovation paradigm can do. So the research that we are now doing is around this. It's around the idea that citizen innovation is enormous in scale and scope. Present government policy, like supporting producers with intellectual property and R&D subsidies, does not apply to citizen innovators. Citizen innovation does have issues with respect to like market failures that I just described that do require some form of government support to be even-handed with the kind of support that government is supplying to producers. Thank you so much for listening to this talk on citizen innovation. I hope you found it interesting. My colleagues and I think that there's tremendous room here for exciting new research, exciting new policy that will increase social welfare and be to the benefit of us all.
Well, we all know that Professor Hippel has been one of the grounding fathers of open innovation, and this was really impressive to hear his views. So now I would like to invite the panel to the stage. We have a very sort of impressive panel, Susanna Rahkamo, who all Finns and Europeans know as a true European champion in figure skating, and since been doing a lot of interesting work in Olympic Committee and also in innovation consultancy. Miki Kuusi, who is the founding father of the SLUSH event and is currently an entrepreneur. And finally, Alberto Minin is an old friend and has done a lot of work on innovation management and is currently promoting and developing innovation tools for SME, small and medium-sized companies. But in order to introduce the topic, I will just very, very briefly show you some slides which in fact describe the way how the innovation practice has changed over the years. The slides.
Good idea.
As I said, so I have spent a lot of time in industrial positions throughout the years, but I'm currently a professor of innovation management in Aalto University, so this is a new career for me. But I have been able to use my background information somehow to reform the way how we perceive the innovation. And there are three things that I want to mention, and all are associated with the ICT revolution. Internet has revolutionized the innovation practices. Today, innovation takes place in networks, in global networks, regional networks, or national networks. They involve various stakeholders, large corporations, small corporations, universities, research institutions, governments, and citizens, as we heard. And being involved in these kind of networks is, of course, a must for anybody who wants to be successful in his innovation activity. The second important step was something that Professor Hippel was talking about. This is what we are talking about, that the citizens, individual stakeholders, have become key players in the innovation game. Today, we use citizens, we use small and medium-sized companies, we use researchers, we use all kinds of stakeholders to contribute. For example, during my days at Nokia, we had more than 4.5 million application developers around the world to develop different kinds of applications. And this would not be possible without having a proper platform to provide this kind of an opportunity. And thirdly, is open innovation. Open innovation is a must today for industrial companies, because what we have learned is that no institution, however powerful it might be, cannot master and control or have the competence in all those different areas which are relevant for the development of new innovations. And thereby, it's vitally important to be connected in the outside world, and open innovation has opened the door for these kind of opportunities. That, of course, requires a lot of new ways of working also for the traditional institutions, like universities. Universities are now no more only institutions that provide excellent science and education. They have become partners in the innovation practice. They have to learn to play the game in these new environments. Of course, it requires also the rules of the game. And thereby, there are a lot of different types of elements that have to be included. I'm not going into detail, we can discuss more about this, but ultimately, it is a question that we have to reform the university system in order to be able to bring all those talents and all that knowledge which universities today provide for us to promote the innovation globally. And finally, I conclude by saying that we have fortunately been very successful of getting a 2.6 million grant from Horizon 2020 to launch a major European study to learn to understand that how European industries have learned to use these new tools and what kind of experiences there are of their use. But at the same time, we need to reform also the innovation systems, because still our innovation systems are to a large extent reflecting the old realities of industrial age. And we have to change the innovation systems in order to be able to promote the new tools which provide the future for innovation. So with these words, I wanted to introduce the topic, and before opening the floor for, let's say, exchange of views, I would like to give the floor to Alberto, who is presenting us briefly the SME scheme from the Commission.
Thank you, Erkki. Can I have my slides, please? Oh, yes. So, good morning, everybody. Let me kick off by focusing on the recommendation 1.3 of a high-level group on innovation and policy management. And Dr. Stefan Schepper is the chair of the next session, and he will tell you a little bit more about this work, if his voice allows him to do, because he's a little bit has a problem with a cold. But anyway, I would like to introduce what I'm about to say, focusing on this recommendation, because here you see very clearly that this group of experts called the EU authorities to facilitate co-creation for global competitiveness, and starting from the assumption that at this point the level of collaboration and co-creation of value has reached unrecorded level. In order to be competitive, large companies, small enterprises, university and public sector, as well as users, need to collaborate. Let me focus on two elements that enable co-creation in my mind. First of all, as a scholar of innovation, management and policy, I'm extremely interested to consider how collaboration on innovation happen, and how open innovation 2.0 unfolds. The first, and in my view, maybe the most fundamental starting point in determining the characteristics of an alliance, is to realize that the disruptive technology needs to be combined with a non-disruptive business model to let the cooperation start. So the emphasis on the business model is something that is very, very important, and we need not to forget this while we engage in discussion, also when we discuss about involvement with user communities. An example about this comes not far from here, from Espoo. The company called Superiore basically allows, through the implementation of a very potentially disruptive technology, to showcase different messages on the billboards that people in Berlin watch when they're watching the Champions League finals, and the other millions of viewers can see a different billboards, because it's broadcasted and it's from a digital perspective is changed from a digital point of view. This augmented reality technology, you can realize, has a very disruptive potential, but the company makes the point that what they're doing, they are creating through this digital technology a new market, and they try by doing so to combine a dialogue between the broadcaster, the brand looking for advertising, and whoever owns the right of the game. So that's a great example of what I had in mind. Second point, innovation and societal challenge. As a storyteller of innovation, I'm not saying that science and technology is the only source for innovation, quite the contrary. But I strongly believe that from science and technology, you can have the pool of technologies and ideas that can address the major societal challenge. So Superiore founder was a professor of physics, but this other example coming from Austria Google technology used to be a spin-off from Graz University, is now a multinational present in various countries, commercializing 60 countries worldwide and developing contributing as well in the debate of brain-computer interfaces, and is now working on application to improve communication possibility with people, for people with disorders of consciousness. This is a nice example of how a spin-off company can really contribute both to the scientific debate and as well as and technology and society as well as business. There is another element, as Erkki was mentioning, that keeps these companies in common. This is a response to the Carpe Diem request that my friend Bror brought at the beginning of this conference. These companies both applied successfully in the course of last year to the so-called SME Innovation Instrument. Horizon 2020 has pledged that 20% of its budget, so 16 billion euros approximately, should go to SMEs. Almost half of this budget, approximately 7 billions, will go through this dedicated SME instrument. It's a bottom-up instrument targeting directly innovation projects that are disclosed by companies. This is a very interesting tool, and that is why I'm talking about this today. This slide should give you the sense of why it's urgent that this community is aware about this. 25% of all applications so far sent to Horizon were sent to this project. 25%. It's a big number, 1 out of 4. And the Commission has already financed 800 companies around Europe, assigning 258 million euros. We are in front of a very interesting learning ground for this community. And by the way, digital, open disruptive innovation, ICT, so the area that DG Connect is focusing on, has been so far the most targeted area where we can see a lot of action going on by proposals. If you look at the distribution by countries, you see that Spain, UK, Netherlands, Germany, France and Italy are leading, but the other countries are rising up. Remember that this program assigns a lump sum approximately of 2 million euros each company in the phase 2 of the program. Let me conclude by emphasizing why I think that this community should take notice of the SME Innovation Instrument. The main reason is that SME funded through this program are connecting science and technology to the market, and potentially they're engaging users as well in a unique way. The program is being, as we speak, implemented by the Commission at a very quick pace, extremely impressive. I'm not saying there are no problems. There are problems in the implementation, and we are trying to facilitate the Commission in addressing this problem. But the contribution to the company is direct, and the effect should be felt within a limited amount of time. Also, the Commission is pledging to evaluate the success of the program through the way that private investment is leveraged. So in a few years from now, we will see these companies attracting capital, private capital, and this is going to be an interesting thing to observe. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to conclude here saying that in my view, as the framework program Horizon presents for us a very interesting learning ground. We should of course look forward and change and innovate, but let's not forget the lessons of the past. Let's not forget that this is an area where there is a lot of discussion already. I wanted just to close leaving you on this slide 3 of the recommendations that came out of the work by our chair, Erkki Ormala. He was vice president of Nokia, but also he was working on the evaluation of the framework program. There are 3 points written in 1990, at the end of the 90s. No, well,
2006.
2006, so 10 years ago. And I think you can recognize that 10 years after, these are very interesting working areas as well. So you see universities leading European knowledge base, but they might fall behind in the global competition for knowledge and talent. Something that is very worrisome for me is the fact that the general public was becoming disengaged with the social impact of science and technology, and this is really a very important danger, and we should keep that in mind. And also, one of the main problems was identified that the industry showed little interest of public-private partnership. These are problems that I think Horizon is facing as well and is trying to address. The Semi-Innovation Instrument is an interesting platform to learn, and I encourage this community of scholars, of innovators to take a look at it and make sure it doesn't fall off the radar screen. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Alberto. And I would now like to ask Susanna that how do you see, taking into consideration your long experience, that how can you release creativity? How do you manage organizations in the way that allows people to really innovate and not being afraid of failure, but using this opportunity as part of their daily job?
Well, I see creativity is a habit, it's a learned skill. It is not something that we possess when we're born. But the problem is that the people are not taught, they are not, we are all in the school, we're getting a lot of skills, but not creativity skills. And there's a lot of people on the marketplace, in the companies, that are very effective on doing something that somebody else has said that do this, but they're not taught to be creative. And I think we should take a little bit from this corporate, from the individuals when they are innovating, then they having fun, they taking it more for the personal kind of engagement. We should use that much more to leave them a possibility to have fun in work, because we've been kind of trying to get the effectiveness so tight that the fun has been kind of forgotten from the work. And I think that's the first thing, because that way we are getting engagement. The problem still is that the industry is not seeing this very important. So it's kind of they still have a job to do. And if the top management is not seeing this fun important, this kind of a way of giving people the freedom of finding the new things, it's not going to go anywhere. So it's a changing of culture, changing a way people behave, how they act. So then we can change the things. Now we know in a cognitive ways that there are these parties that need to engage with each other, but then we need to get the people to really take the actions and start having fun.
Exactly. So, Miki, what is your experience from SLUSH and now your new role as an entrepreneur? That is there enough fun in your activity, and how has the SLUSH been able to create the kind of atmosphere which would provide opportunities for new innovations?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is a fun moment to be in the Open Innovation Forum, because in the SLUSH team we actually had a rule that the word innovation was banned. Because one thing I noticed in Silicon Valley and in many startups is that no one ever used the word innovation. People were always talking about like experimenting and doing things, and when they figured that, okay, this might work, you iterated on that and so forth. So the language was completely different. But one thing that has shaped my thinking of like thinking about creating like new successful companies was in 2010 when I was visiting Israel for the first time, and I read on the plane the book Startup Nation. It's a book that tells the story of the Israeli tech ecosystem and how that tiny country of 7 million people has produced in the last few decades, over 30% of NASDAQ-listed companies from Europe. I mean, imagine 7 million people, 500 million people in Europe, yet 30% of NASDAQ-listed companies founded in the past 2 decades or so were founded in Israel. And one thing I remember from the book was that, it's exactly as just was discussed a moment ago, that it's about the culture. Everything starts with the culture. The culture of taking risk and living with uncertainty and so forth. And once you create something that maybe has potential to scale, you're going to need funding to take that forward. And at that point, it's very important there's a functioning venture capital ecosystem. So coming back to SLUSH, what we've been doing with the event has been to create this ecosystem. I think a couple of issues we've had in Europe. One is that there hasn't been such a strong culture of entrepreneurship. We're a continent that likes to go work for established brands, to go work in a bit safer environments. And a second, more significant issue is that we don't have a domestic venture capital industry in Europe. If you ask any US venture capital fund, like Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz, the biggest VC funds in the world, they say there are no VC funds in Europe. So I think that we have a very good start in Europe now in the past 5 years, that this has changed tremendously. But there's still a lot to do.
Thank you. I want to collect some kind of paradoxes here. And this brought to my first paradox, and that is that when you look at the latest statistics from the OECD, 75% of all OECD area venture capital comes from the United States. Israel has more venture capital funds than Germany or France. So you can imagine that how Europe has difficulties of creating growth companies, because it's easy to get seed funding, but to get funding for the growth phase is a challenge. So what would you say, Alberto? How do you get your SMEs to grow?
I would go back to statistics and point to the fact that in the US right now, most of the investments being made by venture capital are backed by investment of corporate venturing. So yes, Europe has no venture capital industry, very little venture capital industry, but my main concern right now is with the lack of corporate venturing. And I think that that's an area where we need to point our fingers to. If we read Startup Nation, if we look at the history of the Silicon Valley, we look also not only at venture capital, but to the presence of the Department of Defense, DARPA, and extremely big military investment that created the sense, that there was a lot of fun in enabling this innovation, but there was a big incentive coming from big pockets, and these big pockets created Silicon Valley. These big pockets created some Israel, and I think that if we forget about that, and if we focus only on the cultural elements that I'm not saying are not important, are fundamental, we leave out a very fundamental ingredient that can eventually be leveraged by the rise of a venture capital industry.
Right. Susanna.
Well, it is essential. I think that was a very interesting, this Japan, how they are now getting corporations to invest. And we see also in Europe, for example, in retail industry, that there are corporations are making these incubation centers. Like in Berlin is one of the big ones that there is the corporations bring money to form a new ways of business. And they bring it there where are those people who can make something happen. But I think this is something that needs to come from the top level, the kind of the engagement, the need for doing something new. And this is a change of a culture, it's a change of a habit, it's a kind of that this is really crucial. It's not just something that we try out, but it's something that we really heavily invest. And I think in Europe, the structure is different than in United States, so we need those corporations to take the action.
Yeah. Miki.
I think one paradox with Europe has been that we have a lot of talent here. I mean, just look at Finland, for instance, how much the government has invested into R&D and into the universities. And as a result, we have a very established group of large companies. I mean, Europe is full of large companies. Our biggest issue currently is that if you look at the top 20 most valuable technology companies that have been created in the last decade, there's not a single European one. There's around 5 Chinese, around 10, 12 from the United States, and the rest are from the rest of Asia. And I think this is kind of our biggest issue, that Europe was the place where the success stories, before and a bit after the World War II were created. But our biggest issue is kind of learning how to live in this new environment that is molded by internet and deregulation and every business being global pretty much from the very early days. But there's a lot of talent here, so it's only a way of figuring out how do we untap the talent into these new technology companies. I believe there's a lot to do with venture capital, there's a lot to do with culture, there's a lot to do with what kind of role models we have. EU is doing a fantastic job in terms of deregulation. In many industries you don't need to comply with 27 different legal sets anymore if you found a company into the European market. But as said, there's still a lot to do. Those top 20 companies, not a single European one. I think that is a bit frightening fact.
Well, we all know the challenges. The issue of digital single market has been around us for 6 years now, and not much progress has been done so far. I just last week had a very interesting experience. I was visiting in a World Media Conference in Brussels, and the only way how you can get a European-wide licensing right for copyrighted content is to give a license to an American platform player to provide globally the right to distribute the copyrighted content. So this is my second paradox. But what would you say that how can we in a way mobilize and enhance the European innovation potential? What would be your, let's say, key message regarding that? How can we release the innovation potential that we have in Europe? Maybe we start from Susanna.
Well, I think we need people to change their habits. So in all of these quarter helix kind of parties, the problem at the moment is that each of them speak their own language, and they don't really, even if you put them together, they don't understand each other. And there needs to be people who understand wide enough, even if they know their own stuff, so the kind of a T-shaped persons, to have a wide understanding, to kind of have the language to understand a little bit of the other's way of seeing the world. And only of having these people then to collaborate, to go this bar, what we call also today. So then something happens. But as long as the people are in their fields, not understanding the others, it won't go anywhere. But it's about the people. The people need to change. The people, they have to have the freedom, the kind of to give them a courage to create something new, not to stay like they are.
Miki. As a couple of points, one thing that is very important is culture. Anyone who has visited San Francisco in the past 10 years or so knows the strength of the culture. You pretty much see it anywhere you visit, any single technology company you visit there. The difficulty with culture is that it can't be created from top down. It can't be created by a government initiative that we need an entrepreneurial culture and let's change this. It has to start from bottom up. So that's something that we've seen with SLUSH as well, that, for instance, I would say that the entrepreneurial culture in Finland has changed dramatically since the burning platform speech at Nokia in 2011. So there has been a culture shift, but it can't start from top down. The second thing is creating the domestic venture capital industry. I mean, currently VC funds from Europe, from the United States are cherry picking in Europe. They see Spotify emerging, that it's becoming successful, and they cherry pick. They invest into that company, and hence Spotify has the capabilities of raising enough billions of euros of funding that it can become successful. So we need a domestic industry. Israel, showed with asymmetric funds one way to do that. The Chinese government is very active in creating their own industry. Then the third thing is creating opportunities through deregulation. I think one very fantastic example is drones in the United States. It is technically legal to fly drones in most states in the United States, but the federal state has created a permit, like a temporary permit that you can actually do that. And I think there were 450 companies that already gotten the permit. So it's illegal to do that, but there's a permit that you can do it, nevertheless, because the US federal state sees that, okay, this is going to be a big shift in technology and our regulation is not there yet. So I think these 3 points are something I would look into first, at least.
Very good. Alberto.
I think, Erkki, the key word for this Open Innovation 2.0 community is, and that summarizes what my fellow panelists have said, is intrapreneurship. We need to allow our institutions, our companies, our universities to be more intrapreneurial, in the sense that there needs to be room for experimentation within our institutions, diagonal movement of people from industry to academia, the possibility, or vice versa, to government. This, I think, is a foundation for more venture capital, more exit strategy for the SMEs, more bottom-up approaches, because if there is one element that at this point I envy from the other side of the ocean, is a more clear emphasis on entrepreneurship. It's lacking in Europe. I don't see it. I wish to see it more.
Thank you. And let me then finally raise my third paradox, which I also learned last week, that US is heavily investing today hundreds of millions of euros or building something what they call the energy internet. Why can't the energy move as freely as can information? There are no technical barriers to do that. There are only institutional barriers which prohibit that kind of a revolution in the European context. And to conclude our discussions, I would like to raise a slightly optimistic view, because we have now learned that there is 300 billion euros going to be invested in Europe, and I hope that at least 10% of that amount would be invested in the way that would support the ideas that have been presented in this panel. Let's create an incentive for companies to establish venture business. Let's invest for creating the digital single market, and let's create an opportunity for European entrepreneurs also to share risk, so that they don't have to carry everything on their own shoulders. Thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure. Thank you. Kiitoksia.